That's waffle breakfast in the afternoon. And that one's mine. James is having two, and I think his looks prettier today. But
well, they both look awesome.
they look both look pretty.
Slightly different design.
So you're going to be reviewing ABC of Reading by Ezra Pound,
The
eh?
ABC of Reading by Ezra Pound. And here's the A to Z about reading. The Z or Z. You better, when you read, consume your books. Now, you don't have to beat them up the way that I do. I couldn't help it, this one. It was a little bit aged when I got hold of it. And I just put some sweat in on it, and spine came off. And when that happened, then the front page came off. I suspect before I'm through, pages will be falling up through it the second time. Should make that clear. So I've gone through it once, and actually twice I can see in here, and I'm almost through it a third time. Halfway through, I should say, third time. I did it. I read it so long ago that I used different underlining. Like I used to underline well under the words that I was underlining. But now I underline right underneath the word. It's like the word is sitting right on top of it. So it's neater. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to see, but it's amazing how long ago I went through it the first time. So the ABC of reading, is it essential reading, required reading? Not really. I don't know if this guy knew much about reading. He has some interesting stuff to say about poetry. I don't know if he knows that much about novels. He kind of admits it. But he recommends Stendhal. What is it? The first half of the book I just finished reading and reviewing, Le Rouge et le Noir, the Red and the Black. He seems to think, I suppose, that, although it doesn't say it, that Stendhal kind of ran out of steam in the second half of that book. He recommends Gustave Flaubert. When he was writing stuff that he published, I think in 1920, along with T.S. Eliot, he was writing it's called Hugh Selwyn Mauberley, and it's kind of like supposed to be based on him, Hugh Selwyn Mauberley, Ezra Pound. And so he's writing presumably about himself, kind of like himself. His true Penelope was Flaubert. So that's what he was always, presumably, like Ulysses, trying to get back to, Ithaca. His true Penelope was Flaubert, even though Pound was a self-styled poet. He wasn't very good. He was a little bit better when he did some translations, like a prose translation of Li Po. What is it? Something about the merchant's wife or something like that. It's prose. It's short prose. It's not in the original. He's such a joke, really, when it comes to translating poetry, because the original would have, I suspect it's 7 symbols per line, 7 syllables per line. Just 7. It could have been 5. So I've actually gone through it in the originals a long time ago. I actually own a book I don't know what it was doing in the downtown library here. It was like written on Russian toilet paper, and it's a Tang Dynasty anthology, bilingual. And it is something else, I gotta tell you. Tang Dynasty poetry, some of the best poetry ever laid out. So I tried translating some of that stuff. I was trying to translate it something like verse, not so-called free verse. Free verse is just free prose. not very informative. Putting verse in there just doesn't. So, well, it's a lie. So this guy is going around. He says he's got some stupid things to say about Chinese and Japanese poetry. It's the image. I'm going. You don't. He doesn't understand Japanese poetry, because Japanese poetry, a symbol can be multiple syllables. It can have a Chinese reading, or you can have a Japanese reading. And the Chinese reading will be one syllable. The sound was changed by the Japanese in almost every case. But any symbol pretty well can be read with a Japanese reading. Sometimes there's multiple readings. He doesn't understand. He was basing his stuff on the work of a guy called Fenollosa, who died a little prematurely and stuff like that. And somehow or another, the unfinished manuscript, or maybe a semi-finished, unpublished, maybe I should say, ended up in Pound's hands, and he ran with it. And, what did he do? Oh, it reminds me of, what was his name? Jim Marshall. Sometime in the, maybe around 1970. He was an awesome player. He was very, very resilient. Like he was playing defense, as they would call, for the Minnesota Vikings. Maybe their front four. And they used to call him something like Wrong Way Marshall. And what happened is he recovered a fumble, and he ran it into his own end zone for a safety touch. He lost track of where he was. So that's kind of like when Ezra Pound runs with Fenollosa. He runs the wrong way. He's wrong way Pound. So when he goes and says something like, "Oh, Chinese poetry is so much more concrete than Western poetry," no clue at all. When you look at German stuff, well, he does look at Germanic stuff, the seafarer, because it has the kennings. The whale road, that's the sea in Anglo-Saxon poetry. Whale road. So that's supposed to be more concrete. When we use things a lot, the concreteness just gets washed out of it, comes out in the wash. It's like washing something too much. Doesn't that sometimes, if things aren't color fast, the colors come out, right? We wash it too much. And, that's in the space of a little while, in someone's lifetime. But when you're talking about stuff that's been used over multiple lifetimes, multiple generations, the meanings just get washed out. Example, what does goodbye mean? Goodbye means, it doesn't mean God be with you anymore. And, like when people said God be with you way back when, it really didn't mean that much to people. Weren't going, well, I sure hope God is hanging with you. It was just a formality. And it became so much of a formality, people just sloughed it all together. And it'd be something like, God be with you, and then goodbye, something like that. It just gets all sloughed over. There's no concreteness left to it. This is the only concrete thing about it. There's no God in there, and there's the you is kind of like, okay, it's understood. So it's just a formality and things like that. Pound doesn't understand that. So he's explaining why he translated the stuff that he did. I think it's the seafarer is one of the things. Translate this. I think he translated Propertius, things like that. He has here's one thing. Great literature is simply language charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree. Well, utmost, no. That's overstatement. That would suggest that something's perfect, utmost. But to a great degree. And so what he has next is dichten. Dichten. Condensare. He doesn't actually explain what those mean. But condensare, that means to condense in Latin. Right? I begin with poetry because it's the most concentrated form of verbal expression. So Basil Bunting, fumbling about with a German-Italian dictionary, found that this idea of poetry as concentration is as old almost as the German language. Dichten is the German verb corresponding to the noun Dichtung, meaning poetry. And, well, it's actually, I think we'd find it means something like composition. Dichten means poetry, but Dichten, I think, can mean writing artsy kind of thing. And the lexicographer has rendered it by the Italian verb meaning to condense, condensare, originally from the Latin. And yeah, you'd better condense your stuff, okay? Now, to use the German stuff as definition of poetry is maybe a little bit wrong. Well, poetry, the word itself, comes from Greek, and I think the basic verb means just to make. You make something. The way I look at it is there's a certain degree of craft suggested by that. Craft. You know, it's not just bleh. I'm an expressionist. Bleh. There, I'm expressing myself. Okay? A certain degree of craft. I don't know what verse means. I think it probably means to turn or something like that. So that would come from Latin. So I don't know exactly how turning would come from it. Now, I'm just guessing about that meaning. But we'd find different meanings around the world as to, in terms of what poetry means. And I don't think this guy had much of a clue. When he just goes with one definition, oh yeah, here he is on Chinese stuff. So here, I'll show you how he's... I was mentioning this before, but just in case you weren't watching it in a previous review, I was warning you that I was going to be reviewing this book. Okay, so dude, that's Ezra Pound, looks at these sorts of things. Man, would you guess that that's a man? It looks like a stick figure, but just the legs of it. Now, I have a very bright relative, a youngster, he might have been 12, looking at this, and he was able to do what I wasn't able to do, and figure out that that means a tree. It looks maybe a little bit like a conifer. And Ezra Pound is saying these are ideographs. They are obviously... Oh, this is a sun. You see, originally it was a circle with a dot in it. But the scribes, the Chinese scribes, eventually started using brushes. And it was easier. Now, this is, I think it's 5 strokes. 1, that's like a 7, something like a 7. 2, 3, and then the one across the middle. That's not a dot in the middle anymore. It's a line. Okay? Now here he's going, sun tangled in the tree's branches as at sunrise, or sunset I suppose, meaning the east. So it does mean at sunrise. So see, you got a tree there. The cross for the tree has been amalgamated with the cross of the sun, sort of thing. So that's one thing that's a picture. But then he's going, oh, you know, like here, red. So he says, he puts, or his ancestors put together the abbreviated pictures of rose, cherry, iron rust, and flamingo. Well, that's unusual, because usually what you've got, and he, you know, like he's just got, I don't know if he has any more Chinese symbols in here than those 4 that he put there. Was it 4? No, 4. You know, like you've got to do a better study than that, because ordinarily what you get with Chinese writing is you'll get something like on the left hand side of the symbol, or on the top of it, sometimes on the bottom, but here, like with tree, it'll, I think, tend to be on the left hand side. It'll be thinned up, and then there'll be something on the right hand side. The left hand side basically gives you a picture. It's called a radical, and there's 200 of them. But the right hand side tends to be something that at one point in time gave you a suggestion of what the sound was like, because they had many different sounds for trees, different types of trees. And the trouble is, those sounds were assigned the symbols within that complement the radical within a sign. The sounds have changed. Just like you look at the English language and the sounds have changed for so many things. So it happened that way with Chinese. So it's not even a good mnemonic for remembering what the sound is like in the Chinese stuff. And it gets even more strange when you run across the Japanese, where they change the sounds kind of like automatically going from one language to another. That's when they're trying to duplicate, or tried at one time to duplicate the Chinese sound. So what we've got here with Ezra Pound is basically like he's strutting around pretending that he's highly learned and things like that. And he's I was going to use the PH word. He's basically an ignoramus, a relatively learned ignoramus. He did know some Italian. He would have known some Latin. I like to think he knew some Greek. He has epigraphs for his stuff with Greek, and he'll be quoting Greek in his some of his so-called poems or self-styled poems and things like that. So, how is he an ignoramus? He didn't know nearly as much as he pretended to know. Now, he had problems. I'm afraid he was something like a hypomanic, maybe manic depressive or something like that. The important thing is people who are that way, nowadays they should be using lithium, I suspect. But, like if they've got these strange compulsions, they got to make sure that they don't, for example, collaborate with the Italians during World War II, collaborate with Mussolini, and do anti-Semitic radio programs that are being broadcast. I don't know how far they were being broadcast, but presumably to American soldiers in Europe and things like that. You're responsible if you have something a little bit wrong with your psychology and stuff like that. If it's a little bit off base, you're responsible for the way you behave. Just because you're hypomanic, manic depressive, or bipolar doesn't mean you can go around recommending that castigating Jews for indulging in usury. Ezra Pound had this problem. He wrote stuff, like his cantos are always talking about usury, and stuff like that. So the one thing he does is he points out a couple of guys, Walter Savage Landor and Robert Browning, as being poets to imitate. He doesn't. He gives some examples from them. He says, "I shouldn't have to point out what their virtues are." And yes, you have to, you stupid idiot. It's not just enough to kind of semi-anthologize them here in this small volume. You'd better point out what they're good at, and not good at. You'd better give me a fair balance. So, one of the things, I'm checking Browning out. He's not quite as good as I was thinking, maybe even hoping. I was thinking he was one of the first real English poets in the English language. But, and what I mean is, I don't think he inverted word order nearly as much as his contemporaries, let's say Tennyson, or his immediate predecessors like Keats and stuff like that. But, Matthew Arnold's considered supposed to be one of the big three in the Victorian era in English poetry. Arnold was awful, just a lousy stylist. Tennyson was a smooth stylist, but he inverted, and way more than Robert Browning. And Robert Browning, he did invert. I've been going through an anthology of stuff fairly carefully, comparing him with someone like John Dryden. I'm going through John Dryden's translation of the Aeneid for the second time. I read Olive Dryden's stuff on Greyhound bus trips, and that was just on the stops in between. I find it hard to read on Greyhound buses or buses generally or traveling generally. But I'd have big layovers at a place called Medicine Hat. Sometimes it's multiple hours, and I just read things like Dryden. That's how I got through Dryden. By going through Dryden, Ontario, and just see if you can find that over. But Dryden is awful for inversion. So the first page I was checking out recently in the Aeneid, this translation of the Aeneid, fully 1/3 of the lines on that page, and I think there were 50 lines on that page, something like that, fully 1/3 of them had some sort of an inversion. Wow, that's awful. The next page, he was uncharacteristically forthright, and I think he only had 4 lines in front of that. So we'll have to see what it was like. So, yeah. Now, if you hear some honking and stuff like that in the background, that might be Nazis and other fascists and others of their ilk, militia types, in their trucks and whatever, heading up from Coutts, that's south of here on the American border. 49th parallel. We're roughly on the 50th parallel here, so that's roughly 7 miles away. Heading up presumably to Edmonton. Things like that. If they get the reception that they deserve there, well, I've not recommended they get the reception they deserve, seeing the violence and hate crimes they've been committing in a variety of different places, and as well exposing people to whatever bugs they might have. But I don't like answering violence with violence, but they should be. I don't like doing it personally, and I don't recommend that people do it, and I don't recommend that the police and armed forces do it. But I do suggest, I don't think they'll do it, but I suggest that they just put them under siege and not allow them to mix with the public, and starve them out, literally starve them out, not allow them to go.
Well, not literally starve them out. They will leave. They won't starve themselves.
The thing is, out. They've got to come out.
Yeah.
Leave their trucks behind and come out. In other words, they're barricaded in there. Leave their trucks behind, and then they've made a choice. If they want to die with their trucks or something like that, that's their problem. If they come out to poop, they can poop and then pee in their trucks. If they come out to poop and pee in their truck outside, they should be run in for defacing public property and stuff like that. And their vehicles, because they've been committing crimes and stuff like that, their vehicles should be impounded. Is not exactly the word for it, because they wouldn't be paying a fine. They would lose the rights to their vehicles, and farmers apparently.
Well, they should be warned about it first. They
well,
should be warned
of course,
that will happen.
It should be made clear before they hit to Edmonton that that's the way it's going.
Yeah.
Now it's apparently farm vehicles.
Why are they going to Edmonton?
Oh, they're going to be. They don't like Jason Kenney, right? Because Jason Kenney has been absolutely crazy trying to keep them on side with them, and so he's allowed all sorts of restrictions. Every time he thinks he's got a chance to, he will lower restrictions and stuff like that. So he's a bad guy to them. So they're going to besiege the Legislative Assembly and try to gum up downtown Edmonton the way others of their ilk have gummed up downtown.
That'll really be a problem, because Edmonton's downtown is a problem.
Edmonton's downtown is not planned very well.
No.
But you could actually gum up Calgary worse, because there are only so many different routes into the downtown. It's kind of separated by the railroad to the south of the downtown. You know how there's that lump there north of the railroad, defined by the Coal River.
I think they could make more of a mess of Edmonton.
It's possible. The Edmonton downtown is just kind of scattered all over the place. So where is the downtown exactly? Jasper Avenue and something or other. But it's kind of like,
yeah, you're right,
spilled out all over the place. So they'd actually have a tougher time glomming it up. Now, if they glom up the, I think there are more bridges across the river in Calgary.
Yeah.
But if they decide to block the passage across the river, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So what they should be doing, of course, with the folks when they come out of their vehicles, once they get besieged out, then they should be taken into custody. Records should be made of who they are. People are talking about suing them. You know, when you get business guys mad at you.
Well, what
you're
I'm
in
wondering
trouble.
about is where this funding for them came from. I'm thinking
Well,
it might
it's
actually
crowdfunded,
be
yeah.
left-wingers who funded them
Okay.
to try to, because they're trying to make them look really bad.
Who?
Well, I mean, they're not smart themselves that they're doing this.
They're
but
making themselves look bad,
like,
but go on.
But whoever is funding them is making them look bad.
Oh, I
They're
see what
giving
you're
them
saying. Yeah, I thought you were talking about the media. The media is being very, very kind.
So honestly, I think whoever is funding them is giving them the rope to hang themselves, kind of thing.
It's possible.
So
they are hanging themselves whether or not it's intended.
yeah.
When Jason Kenney came out in support of the flunkies down at Coots,
Such a bad idea.
he should have been hanging himself, just talking
Yeah, this
figurative.
This is not
politically forever.
This is not good for them.
I don't know. You know, like what they've done here is they've intimidated hospital workers. They're in the process of amping that up. They've intimidated gays in the Ottawa gay community. They've intimidated people wearing masks.
Yeah, but this is just making them look terrible.
Doesn't matter, because these guys are Nazis. They're not into winning elections.
Okay, these guys are,
Okay.
but you know, not all anti-vaxxers are. There's a lot of really decent anti-vaxxer people out there, and
There
this
might
is
be.
tarring them all with the same brush and making them look terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when the media talks about anti-vaxxers, people will be thinking, "Oh, Nazis." Well, they're not.
Yeah.
Not all of them are. There's a lot of really good people who don't believe in vaccination because, frankly, because they're sane. You know, if you're out on your farm and you're not mixing with other people,
Ever. Yeah.
you should be just fine without vaccines.
Yeah. But that means that they've got to be growing their own food, or having it kind of like parachuted in or something like that, delivered to them where they, you know, like it's a dead drop, as they say in
Because
asthma.
honestly, I mean, they've linked vaccine use in dogs to learning difficulties and stuff like that, and hyperactivity. And it's like, oh, we're seeing all this ADHD in kids and stuff. And do you think it has something to do with the vaccines? I mean,
It's possible.
it's possible. I can see how a lot of people who are anti-vaxxers, they have legitimate concerns. They
It
don't
started
want their
off as
kids
being
to-
a left-wing movement, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people who they would be left-wing. They would be environmentalists. They would be, they would care about their families very much, and they wouldn't want vaccination because they're concerned about.
Vaccination shouldn't have been required for this in the first place.
No.
It never should have
It
been
didn't
allowed to
help.
come in from China.
The way that they did it, it did not help. It didn't help. It actually made it spread more. The way they